Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is the place to be. And I usually do like to start these episodes by going over a bit of news that I just discovered, but I've just haven't had a whole lot of time to look into recent events. I'm actually filming this one quite a bit earlier than usual because I am heading to the Level Up event, which is happening over the weekend. And if you're planning to be there, feel free to say hello or to stop me because for whatever reason, I have been winning every single game night with my friends lately, and someone really needs to knock me down a notch. So if you think you're up for it, I am happy to play a game. And the first campaign we have launches on February 5th, and this one's called Lovestruck, and this plays 5 to 10 players and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a game where players are going to be contestants on a dating game show. The catch here is that many of the players are looking to find love at the end of the game, but some others might have some other intentions and are just looking to acquire some fame. Each round in this game, players are going to be paired up with another player and then going out on a date with that player. Each player is going to be able to contribute love cards or drama cards towards that date to determine the outcome of the date. If it results in a good date, that's going to be gaining you more action cards for the following rounds, but if it's a bad date, that's going to be granting you more fame. This means that depending on what your intention is for the game, that's going to be determining what you want that outcome to be. Players will be able to use any of the action cards that they gain to get to know the other contestants for certain results for their dates, or even sabotage the other players. After the dates, players all return to the villa where they can perform all sorts of different actions that each have different costs associated with them, but players can couple up with another player, and this allows you to use another action in order to look at their intention card to know if they're looking for love or looking for fame. But players can also use another action for a different cost in order to look at any player's intention card, but they can also break up with anyone that they're coupled with in order to increase their fame, or they can diffuse tension in order to reduce their fame. So that could be a really great action if you want to prove to the other players that you are indeed looking for love and you're not interested in any of the drama. But of course, that's also something someone might do if they're just seeking fame and trying to mislead you. But there is also another action players can take, and that's to go on an extra date within that round. The game continues like this over a series of rounds until that season finale where those final couples are going to be decided, and then whichever players decided to leave the game show together, they'll be able to look at each other's intention cards to see if they did indeed find love, or maybe a broken heart. As always, if you want to learn more about this one, I'll leave a link to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on February 5th, we have a really neat campaign called Ludos Asia, and what this is a collection of ancient games that have been revived with brand new artwork and components, and even a bit of updated rules, but these games come from different places like Japan, Mongolia, Nepal, and Korea. The game that we have from Japan is called Hasimi Shogi, and this is a game where players are going to be starting with units on both sides of the board, and then you'll be able to take turns moving those units, and you can move them in a straight line, either horizontally or vertically in any distance, or instead you can use your movement action to jump over one other piece. The goal of this game is to try and win by creating a row in any direction of 5 of your own pieces, but you can also capture opponent pieces as well if you're able to sandwich them between 2 of your own. And the next game we have offered in this campaign is called Jarmo, and this one originates in Mongolia. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to be starting with 5 units on their side of the board, and then players are just going to be taking turns moving 1 unit, 1 space, with the goal of trying to get as many of their units into their opponent's starting locations, because if you're able to get enough of them over there, that's going to be triggering the end of the game. While you're doing this, if you're able to get one of your units on top of an opponent's unit, it's actually going to remove your opponent's unit from the game, and it's also going to upgrade your unit, and it does also open up the opportunity to get some of your captured units back onto the board. Once the end of the game is triggered, players are going to be gaining victory points for the units that they have remaining on the board, and of course getting more victory points if your units are located in your opponent's starting locations. The player with the most victory points wins the game. The next game offered here is called Yet, and this one originates from Korea, but the way that players are going to be playing this game is that each player is going to have 4 horses that they're trying to get completely around the board. On a player's turn, they're going to be rolling these 4 wooden dowels, and depending on the results of that roll, that's going to determine how many movement points you get. If they all roll completely upward or completely downward, then you also get another roll at the end of your turn. The cool thing here is that since you do have 4 different tokens that you can assign your movement to, you can try to move the appropriate ones to get them in the right locations to take advantage of these shortcuts, or even get tokens to end up stacked on top of each other, allowing you to move multiple tokens with a single movement. The first player to get all of their horses around the board and back to the starting location wins the game. And the last game we have is Bagh Chal. And this is actually a game that I did cover in some previous footage, and I think I did a pretty good job there, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is an abstract strategy game that originated in Nepal. And something that makes this abstract strategy game really interesting is that it's actually asymmetric. So one player is going to be playing as 4 tigers that start out on the board, and then the other player is going to get 20 goats that they're going to be placing out on the board. And the game starts out like that, with the goat player being able to put a goat anywhere on the board on their turn, and then the tiger player can move one of their tigers. Once the goat players put all their goats out on the board, instead of placing a goat, they'll just be able to move one of their goats 1 space, just like the tiger player can move one of their tigers 1 space. But a tiger can capture a goat by jumping over it, just like you would in checkers. So if there's an empty space on the other side of an adjacent goat, then the tiger player can jump to that space, capturing that goat. And if the tiger player is able to capture 5 goats, then they win the game. But the goats are going to win a little bit differently. The goats are trying to trap the tigers so that they're not able to make any movements or capture any goats. And if the goats are able to position themselves in order to do that, then the goat player wins the game. I do recommend checking out this campaign if it does seem interesting to you. I really like what Lemery Games is doing here by reviving some of these ancient games and making them more well known around other regions of the world. And they've done quite great work in their past campaigns, so if you do want to check them out, I do have a link to this campaign in the description below. Launching on February 6th, we have Zipa, and this one is a head-to-head card battler for 2 players. And the way this game works is that players will be choosing a faction and taking their predetermined faction decks, but then players can actually build something called a discovery deck, and there's a whole bunch of different cards that you can include in this, and you can change it up from game to game, and that's really where the variability is going to be coming from in addition to those factions, because players will be using that deck to add new cards to their own decks and find different ways to get different rewards and augmentations that they can use on their turns. Players will be racing to be the first player to gather enough energy to become the galactic superpower, or seek victory through interstellar conquest, which I presume is done by completely destroying your opponent. Also launching on the 6th, we have the Pirate Republic Africa Gambit, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And if you're familiar with the Pirate Republic, this newer version is basically a 2nd edition of the game that's also going to be adding a campaign mode. But if you're not familiar with this game, this is essentially a deck building game where players are going to be playing as different pirates, starting with a common 12 cards, but then having 2 unique cards that are going to be specific to their pirate. The board's going to be set up with a bunch of different merchant and naval ships, as well as different settlements that players can interact with and take advantage of. On a player's turn, they'll be able to determine their movement through dice rolling, but then they're going to be performing combat with their action cards. Players will be able to upgrade their cards throughout the game, and you'll be able to attack all the different ships and settlements that you see out on the board, but some are going to be more difficult than others, and you might need to team up with the other players if you think what you're attacking might just be a little too strong. Of course, that does also mean you'll have to split the booty with your opponent, so you'll want to be picky with who you pair up with and with which battles you decide to take. There are both public and private objectives, so maybe your private objectives makes your half of the score a little bit more valuable to you if it does help you achieve those objectives. Like I said, this new version is going to be adding a campaign mode, but of course it's going to be adding all sorts of different cards and pirates as well, so if you do want to check out all of that, you can find the link in the description below. And also launching on the 6th, we have the next game being offered in the Pulp Invasion series, and this one is called the Galactic Map. I couldn't find any info on this one at all other than what is on this page, but it says here that you're going to be visiting the rim sectors with your space cruiser, finding different allies that you can recruit for the Intergalactic Council. If you're not familiar with this series of games, this is a whole bunch of different games that are all based on artwork from the old Pulp magazines. And if you do want to check it out and see some of the other offerings, I will have a link to this in the description below. And also launching on the 6th, we have yet another campaign from Queen Games. And if you're wondering, didn't they just launch a campaign last month? The answer is yes. For whatever reason, it seems like Kickstarter doesn't have any rules at all. And I do also have my own complaints with how Queen Games does run their campaigns, with fake limited pledges, as well as barely offering anything new in either the game itself or its deluxeification. And then also offering it at ridiculously overpriced prices, which is saying a lot considering everything seems overpriced these days. But Queen Games still does seem to give me quite a lot of sticker shock, even in this landscape. But unfortunately, they're the ones that have the rights to some really incredible games, and for that reason, I am reluctantly making this one my own personal pick of the week. Mind you, I'm doing this without seeing what this one is actually going to cost. Primarily, I'm making this one my pick for the game Nassau because this game does look like a lot of fun, and unlike almost all the games that they have launched recently on Kickstarter that have all just been reprints or slight upgrades to existing games, this one is actually a brand new game. Although it does borrow a few mechanisms from some previous games, it itself is its own brand new game. Kathmandu is also offered in this campaign, although I am less interested in that one, but I'll let you know how both of them do play so you can decide what is most interesting to you. And Nassau is a game for 2 to 4 players that takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And in this game, players are pirates working competitively to get the most victory points. Each player is going to have their own shipboard with some pirates and different weaponry and resources, and players are going to be playing over a series of 4 rounds. Each round starts with players taking turns moving around this black pirate meeple on the left side of the board, and players are going to be moving that pirate through the island, gaining any actions or resources that they're able to get that pirate to stop on. The catch here is that for each space that you move that pirate, you're going to have to spend some of your own personal pirate tokens, meaning that you won't have access to those in the following round because they do have other uses in the game as well. But I think this is a really neat mechanism because even though players are all spending their own pirate tokens to interact with this side of the board, in the end, you're all moving the same pirate token on that board. So that means that wherever you move that pirate on your turn is going to determine the directions available to the following player. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any good images. So mostly everything I'm about to tell you does come from the Gaming Rules channel, which you can definitely go ahead and check out, and they do fantastic work. If you want to see more on this game and see an actual playthrough, they do have a video up for it right now, but I'm just going to be using it to show off a little bit on what you can expect the game to look like. But once all the players do decide to pass, then the focus is going to be moving to the other side of the board where we have this little ocean board, and players are going to be taking turns spending provisions to move their ship around to the different areas and islands available here. Players are going to be able to do different things like raid locations to steal resources, take control of different areas if you meet the requirements in order to do so, and that's going to be gaining you victory points every single round that you control it, unless another player is able to steal it from you. You can also place your remaining pirate tokens out on different locations in order to gain bonuses from those locations. You can also fight different enemies, and the enemies that you decide to fight are going to require different weapons depending on what is indicated on them. Players have a bunch of different weapons on their ship, but by using the different options available to you, you'll be able to upgrade each of those to increase the amount of each of those that you have. Whenever you do engage in a battle, you're going to be drawing a number of tokens from a bag depending on who you're fighting to determine if they attack you and what the effect will be if they successfully land a hit. Depending on your stats, you'll be able to roll a number of dice in order to evade those attacks, but you'll be getting a reward just for entering that battle. But if you do have enough of the appropriate weapon to completely wipe out that enemy, then you'll be gaining additional rewards. But if you only did partial damage, then you're going to be putting some cubes on them just to indicate that. But whoever's able to land that final blow on an enemy is going to be the one to gain that other benefit. So you do only want to do partial damage when you think that you're the one that's going to be able to finish them off. Anytime that a player runs out of provisions or decides to pass during this phase of the game, then they're going to be using their turns to return home, which then just results in them being able to pay money to drop off any of the goods that they're able to collect out on the board so far, and they'll also be able to tell tales of their endeavors, which may also allow them to gain some special bonus cards. Players then all return to their ships where they can choose through a subset of other actions, and then the rounds continue like this until the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points at that point wins the game. As I said, this campaign is offering another game as well, and this one is called Kathmandu. And although I am more interested in Nassau, this game does look like a lot of fun as well, because in this game, players are going to be competing as travelers, trying to visit different locations and have different experiences in order to complete the objectives for the game to win the most victory points. Players are going to be rolling 5 dice of 5 different colors and then using 3 of those to assign to their board to take various actions. One of the main actions players will be using their dice for is to move around on the different tiles out on the board, and each of these tiles are going to be broken up into different regions, and they can also have some different cities and other points of interest that players can visit as well. But the region you're in is very important because there's going to be a bunch of cards out on display as well of varying colors, with those colors matching the different regions that they're accessible in. So if you are in a particular region, performing an action might result in you having access to different cards than if you are in another region. Some of the cards you can gain are gear cards that you can add to your backpack. These can be used in various ways to make moving around easier or provide different opportunities to you when you visit a city. But then the other cards you can gain are the animal cards, and these are gained by spending the appropriate gear when you are in the appropriate region for that card. Like I said, the tiles can also have all sorts of different points of interest on them, and you'll want to visit the cities in order to trade your goods for victory points, but there's also other areas that you might want to visit as well, or certain things that you might want to do in the city in order to complete those objectives that I mentioned before. The objectives might require you to visit certain temples or cities, or to visit all of the different landscapes out on the board, but players don't want to take too long in completing those objectives because there is a time limit here, and there's going to be a storm moving through the different tiles behind the players, and you always want to stay in front of that storm, which means that you're always going to be moving forward. Player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you're interested in either of these, you can check them out. I'll have a link to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 6th, we have a campaign that's going to be offering 3 smaller sized games, and these games are going to be Sunrise at the Studio, Floriferous, and Snowfall over Mountains. The first one I'm going to be going over is Snowfall over Mountains. And this one is actually a solo game that takes about 20 minutes to play. And in this game, you're going to be starting from your cabin and then placing different cards with different footprints, flora, and different points of interest in order to create different sets or adjacencies that you'll want in order to accomplish the different goals offered in that particular game. There's going to be a bunch of different objective cards that will grant you victory points, but you will also be able to gain some special action cards that will allow you to perform some special actions throughout the game in order to try and manipulate the overall pattern to your favor. Sunrise at the Studio actually plays up to 4 players, but still just takes about 20 minutes to play. And this one is a drafting and set collection game where players are going to be different potters, creating different bowls and vases and mugs in order to create different sets and get the most victory points at the end of the game. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of info on how this one plays, but you will be using different resources to go through the process of building the item that you're trying to build and applying the appropriate glaze and paint in order to end up with that final product. Then the final game offered in this campaign is Floriferous, and this is a game that was offered in a previous campaign, so I did actually already cover this one, and I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 20 to 30 minutes to play. And this is a set collection game where players are going to be walking through a garden and trying to collect different flowers in order to gain victory points. Players are going to be walking through the garden by placing their pawn on the tableau, and the pawn is going to represent your location in the garden. Wherever that pawn gets placed, you're going to be able to make a decision from one of 2 options. You can either select flowers to add to your set, or you can select cards that determine which sets will grant you points. So you're basically collecting cards that will define what other cards get you points, but then you're also trying to get those cards. In addition to the set collection in this game, you'll also be able to find some different sculptures and stones for bonus points. And buying on Kickstarter will get you a few extra items for free that will be sold separately in the retail edition of the game. And that includes a mini expansion that's going to add a little bit more complexity in the game because it's going to give you some different options on how you can move your pawn throughout the garden. It also includes components and rules for solo gameplay called the Pesky Guest, which is provided by a guest designer. And something else that's really interesting about this campaign is that all the artwork is actually hand-painted watercolor artwork by a really excellent artist. And if you search up her name, you'll see that she covers quite a variety of subjects with her artwork, but most importantly, she also does some kitty cats. Also launching on the 6th, we have Trailblazer, the Arizona Trail. And this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 40 to 160 minutes to play. And some of you might recognize the name on this one because they did previously release another Trailblazer game called the John Muir Trail. What's cool about this is that although these games do share some similarities, especially in theme, they do play quite a bit differently from each other. I did previously cover this one when it launched, so I will roll that previous footage for you, but first I'll just let you know how the Arizona Trail plays, and this one is a little bit heavier than the previous one. But similarly to John Muir Trail, in this one you still are trying to gather different sights and experiences, but the way that this one rewards you for that is that there's going to be different goal cards that players are trying to achieve, and these are going to be triggered at certain points in the game, and if you fulfill that goal, you're going to be gaining that amount of victory points at that point in the game. There's actually 8 different legs in this trail, with each of them acting as an individual round. And there's going to be a bunch of different cards and tiles out available to the players to try and collect, but many of these won't be replenished until the start of the following round. All these cards have some different effects, like these different creature cards can grant you with some special abilities or allow you to get rid of certain ailments that you might have. Well, these sight cards can actually move you up and down different tracks, and they can also grant you with different types of income that you'll be able to use to purchase other cards or tiles, or just use to try and complete various objectives. But this is a worker placement game, and the workers represent the different locations that you're going to be visiting at that point in the trail, and you're going to be placing them out on the different regions in order to get that benefit. A cool thing here with these polyominoes is that you'll be able to place them onto your own personal board, gaining different rewards for the different patterns and items that you are able to cover. I am just giving you the broad strokes for this one because there are some different types of tiles and cards that you'll be able to discover when you actually do try out this game. But the way that the scoring actually works in this game is that there's going to be 2 different tracks that you're concerned with, and they move opposite to each other around the perimeter of the board. And these are called gold and grit, and there's going to be different ways that you can move up either of these tracks, but they're going to move opposite to each other, and once they cross over each other, that's the point that you can start gaining victory points. You do have to reach this point to be eligible to win the game, but then of course it's the player with the most victory points at the end of the game that does win the game. And of course you'll be determining that once you do reach the end of the trail. Like I said, they did also release another Trailblazers game, but these do play fairly different from each other, so if you're interested to know more about the previous one and see which one is more suited to you, I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is a competitive game where players are going to be scoring victory points throughout the game, but then also scoring points at the end of the game based on set collection as they try to complete the trail while exploring different destinations, admiring different sites along the way, engaging in daily encounters, managing natural and personal resources, and then also strategically using gear in their backpack in order to give them certain benefits along the way. Each round starts with players choosing a resource card from the display, which is going to grant them some resources that they can spend later in the game. After that, players take turns spending their action tokens, which they can use to do things like move along the main trail, gain or spend different trail or field guide cards, which can grant you different resources, which they can spend using another action to visit different hard-to-reach places to earn that location card. Players will be able to collect different trail cards depending on what they can see from their current location, and these different cards can score victory points in different ways. Players have limited space in their backpack, so as you gain new items throughout the game, you're also going to want to be using them to get the most out of all your actions and all your available resources, because if you're not able to reach the end of the trail, then you're not eligible to win the game. But if you're running low, you might also be able to spend an action to visit a nearby lodge and restock on your supplies. The game continues to play like this until the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points at the end wins the game. Also on the 6th, we have Aeon's End the Descent, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 minutes to play. And this one is a standalone expansion in the Aeon's End world. And if you're not familiar with these series of games. This is essentially a co-op where players are going to be choosing different characters and then also choosing a final boss that they'll be fighting against throughout the entirety of the game. Each character is going to have their own associated deck along with the boss. Then players will be performing most of their actions by spending ether, which they get by discarding cards from their hand. This is a deck building game, so in most cases you will be able to get those cards back into your hand, but you'll be using that ether to buy new cards that you'll be able to add to your deck, charge up your special ability, which you'll then be able to use once it's fully charged, or to rotate something called breach cards, because players will be issuing attack cards to the various breaches in order to deal damage to the enemy. But it's a lot easier to deal damage if you completely open up that breach and all of the breaches do start closed. You'll be able to spend ether to actually rotate those breach cards to make opening them a little bit easier. But when they are open, your attack cards will do more damage to the enemy, but then you also have more control as to when they activate. If you ever run out of cards, you actually don't reshuffle your deck. You just take your discard pile and then flip it face down, which means that the order that you use your cards can be used as a mechanism to get certain cards that you want in a particular order when you're drawing from the deck again the next time. The order of the players in the enemy's turn is somewhat randomized, but on the enemy's turn, you're just going to be drawing a card from their deck and then resolving it according to its instructions. This new edition of the game does play very similar to those previous ones, but it does add a few new concepts into the mix. The first one is the Friends and Foes, which is going to be adding additional characters into the mix, and they're going to be mixed into the turn order as well, but they're essentially decks of cards where you'll always be able to see the next attack that they get to do, but of course the friends will be helping you, while the foes will be helping your enemy. Since players will be able to see the next cards for each of these, it does add an additional strategic element that players will be able to plan for. The other new addition to this are the elemental tokens, and these are essentially tokens that players will be able to assign to the various foes or enemy, and you'll be able to build these up on those enemies and then activate them at some point in the game, granting you with some sort of positive effect. The game continues like this until the players have defeated their enemies or until the players themselves are defeated, and when a player's health does get down to 0, they're not eliminated from the game, but their turns become very, very limited with what they're able to do, making the rest of the game much more difficult. But if you are interested to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description below, and of course you can click that follow button if you want to get notified once it launches. And launching on February 7th, we have Conservas, and this is a solo game that takes about 25 to 40 minutes to play. And this is a bag building game all about commercial ocean fishing, while also being mindful of conservation, because in this game players are going to be catching and selling fish and then using those resources to grow and upgrade your fleet so that you can better complete different financial and conservation goals. A really neat aspect to this game is that players are going to be playing throughout the months of a year, but each month is essentially a scenario that's going to have its own individual setup, starting resources, number of rounds, as well as those financial and conservation goals, and even a different market value for the various fish that you'll be catching out at sea. But each round you're going to be drawing a number of tokens from the bag until all of your cards are completely at capacity. You'll be able to place those tokens either on your boats or on the open sea card. If you're putting those tokens onto your boats, that means that you'll be able to trade them later for money or for various upgrades. If you're putting those tokens back into the open sea, that means that you're releasing your catches back into the ocean to encourage growth of that particular fish. This means that more of those fish will be added to the bag in the following round, making them more likely to pull out throughout the rest of the round, which could be really beneficial if you're trying to reach certain conservation goals for that fish, or even if that fish is particularly valuable and you want to forego cashing them in now so that you might have the opportunity to cash in more later. The neat thing about this is that each card can actually only hold 5 tokens, so if you're throwing them back into the open ocean, that means that you can only put 5 on that open ocean card, but you can also choose to throw them back into the ocean on your boat cards. You just have to keep in mind that that means that you're occupying a token location that you might be able to use to sell a different fish. You do only start with one boat at the beginning of the game, so you will want to add more to your fleet so that you can draw more tokens, but you do also want to keep in mind that each of the boats does also have a cost of upkeep, so you don't want to go too crazy with this and end up getting too many boats that you're not able to afford. Each of the scenarios do also offer various goals depending on the difficulty that you want to play, but if you're able to fulfill those goals, then you win the game. And if you are interested in this one, as always, I do have it linked in the description below. And launching on February 8th, we have Isla, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive roll and write of exploration where players are trying to leave an island, but trying to explore as much of it as possible before they leave, because there's lots of opportunity to gain victory points, and also you lose a victory point for every square that goes unexplored. But the way that this game works is that players can be rolling 5 different polyhedral dice at the start of the game, and then each round, each player is going to decide whether they want to rest, move, or research. If you choose to move, you're going to be picking one of your dice and gaining movement points equal to the value of that die, and then you'll be able to move across your board that many times. The catch here is that whenever you use a die, it gets discarded and you're no longer able to use that die until you perform the rest action. Because when you choose that action, you'll be able to take the lowest value die that you rolled that has previously been discarded and then add it back into your supply. This means that you'll want to be strategic with the timing of the dice you use and when you perform that rest action to make sure you're getting back the die that gives you the most benefit. But players will be trying to move onto different locations that have different tiles on them that you'll be able to research in order to get certain victory points if you're able to complete certain sets. And that's exactly what the research action is for, because once you get the tokens that you need, you can perform the research action to get the associated victory points. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And that's everything I have for you this week, and I don't really have time to do giveaways in this episode because I need to hop on a plane real soon and I still haven't packed, but we will have some giveaways next week, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But as always, I do appreciate you checking out the video, and I hope there are some games to be excited about. And if you are attending the Level Up event, definitely feel free to say hello, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.